And now to our Carol Maureen and our latest congressional candidate forum. Carol.
Thank you, Phil. Recession, a crumbling housing market, the Iraq War, immigration, social issues. Congress will have much to tackle in the months ahead. Bill Foster and Jim Oberweis are seeking to represent Illinois' 14th Congressional District. Located in northern Illinois, the district spans from DuPage to Henry counties and includes cities like Aurora, Elgin, DeKalb, and Dixon. Joining us are the two men vying to represent that district. Congressman Bill Foster is Democrat. He won a special election in March to replace resigning Republican and former Speaker of the House Dennis Hastert. Challenging him is Jim Oberweis, an investment manager who also owns and runs a highly successful dairy company. Should note the seating arrangement tonight was decided by a coin toss. Congressman Foster won that toss, and so he will field our first question. I'm just going to presume, gentlemen, and thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That the economy looms as large as any potential issue in your district. Congressman Foster, in the recent congressional votes, two of them for the bailout,
yes.
Though you said you didn't particularly like it, you nonetheless felt you had to vote for it. Will you tell us why?
Yeah, you're right. It is a horrible situation. We're seeing the end game of 8 years of economic mismanagement by the Bush administration and by those that support him. But in this case, there was an economic emergency. The banks, the credit system had locked up in this country, and I know as a businessman, when banks refuse to loan to each other and refuse to loan to businesses, that it means death for businesses. If your operating line of credit is cut off as a business, no matter whether you're a small or a large business, it means laying off people, it means canceling spare parts orders, and it means a general death to the economy. And I felt it was an emergency and that inaction was not an option. So I agreed with John McCain and leaders of our party and most people who really understand how our economy works in realizing that this was an emergency that required government action.
Jim Oberweis, you also are an entrepreneur and businessman, but you do not support the bailout and said you would not have voted for either iteration of it. Will you explain why?
Sure, Carol. I think Mr. Foster is correct in saying that inaction was not an option. However, that doesn't mean that bad action is the right solution. This bill started as a three-page memo which was basically aimed at buying bad assets at above-market prices from some of the Wall Street firms that had helped to cause this. And I have to admit, Congress did plenty to cause this problem as well. But it then went from that to a 110-page bill that was voted down by Congress after 200 of the leading economists in this country wrote a letter to Congress saying, please don't pass this. This is bad legislation. Then it went to a 451-page bill, which is right here, just absolutely loaded with special interest legislation, including silly things like providing a tax break for those companies that produce small wooden arrows for children's bows. And there's only one company that meets that. So this was clearly designed to win votes. This is what people are upset about Congress with. This was a Bush bailout package, but it's not a Republican versus a Democratic issue. It's an insiders versus the rest of us issue. And unfortunately, some of those in Congress who didn't really understand how the financial system worked and didn't understand what this bill would do to our economy felt like they had to support this because they didn't see other good alternatives. We did put forth a much better alternative that would have cost taxpayers nothing.
Congressman Foster, to Mr. Oberweis's point, is that bill laden with pork and some crazy incentives to people?
Well, the thing that was developed and first voted on the House was a fairly clean shot directly at our economic difficulties. And it wasn't just a buyout of bad assets. That was Paulson's original proposal, but there are actually three ways out of this crisis that are spelled out. The first thing is simply the buyout of bad assets with taxpayer protection added. The second one is an insurance program that was put in by the Republicans and is something I supported. It actually has the potential for helping out some class of the markets for these mortgage-derived assets. But the third one, which is the one that I support most strongly and spoke out in favor as the bill was being crafted in the committee, was the so-called equity route, where the government goes to these companies and say, okay, you got yourself in big trouble with some really bad investments.
No, I understand.
And that we're going to go, yes, we'll bail you out, but the taxpayer owns a big hunk of you when we're done.
But to Mr. Oberweis's point, is there pork that was applied to the second bill that wasn't in the first bill?
Yeah, there's no question about that. And again, it depends. It's a balance. You don't get to, as a freshman in Congress, you don't get to stand up and say, you know, I have a 4-point plan. I think everyone should vote on my 4-point plan. You get to vote up or down on what's presented to you. And when this came back from the Senate, no longer a clean bill, what they did is they stapled together a handful of other things, most of which had passed Congress in one form or another, and they stapled them all together to get the votes they needed in the Senate, and it came back. And you had a choice. You know, do you vote to rescue the financial system, or do you continue haggling and send it back to the Senate for modifications? And this was a situation where I thought the responsible thing to do was to hold your nose and vote in favor of rescuing our economy.
Mr. Oberweis, in your judgment, what would be a better plan than the plan that was crafted on a bipartisan basis?
Carol, we put forth a four-point plan, which is takes time to explain, but basically included making permanent the FDIC insurance to $250,000 from $100,000. It included a temporary suspension of the mark-to-market rules, which was really putting the short-term pressure on financial institutions, and it would have provided for the issuance of a new type of common stock that would have been exempt from capital gains taxes to encourage private equity capital to come into these financial institutions to give them new capital instead of taxpayer dollars. And fourthly, to provide the right overall economic environment through tax policy to encourage entrepreneurs and business people to risk their time and energy and capital to create new businesses and new jobs here in the United States.
You two are both prosperous, successful men, people who understand business, but I'm curious.